So let me get this straight. Commander Amaki from Ghost in the Shell was created by Shirow Masamune, who also created Appleseed, has a film that is directed by a man who is also named Amaki. That has got to be the weirdest coincidence I've ever seen. Appleseed. Now, the story of Appleseed follows a soldier named Duda Nude, who is one of the last outcast survivors of the last global war. She's trying to survive, trying to make herself live in the world that has basically just been torn to shreds. All of a sudden, she gets captured by this entity known as a Biowar named Hitomi, and all of a sudden, she gets whisked away to this utopian-esque world known as Olympus, where humans and Biowars are coexisting amongst each other. However, not as all well in this utopian-esque society, as there are certain humans that feel like Biowars are a threat to humanity. They want to wipe them out, and now Dude and Nude must go on to this mission and try to figure out a way to stop these terrorists who are threatening the Biowar's existence, and figure out a way for them to solve this crisis in order to prevent one, for the Biowars from dying or humans destroying each other. And to do this, has to hunt down something that is known as the Appleseed data. During the process of the story, in which she will find out about her own past and memories and try to figure out the balance between humans and Biowars and try to solve this conflict as well as it can. Now, this is probably my third time watching Appleseed, and not because I really wanted to see this again, but mostly because I was just curious of how I would look back on this, considering that even though I saw this originally 9 years ago, how my opinion has maybe changed about it over time, as well as being more aware of who created this originally, as well as knowing that, like Shirow Masamune created the original manga, as far as I can tell from my research, this has not an actual adaptation of the manga. It's more or less taking characters and locations from the original manga and reinterpreting it for the sake of this film. So I'm going to just try to look at this on its own face and not compare it to the original manga. Now, before I get too overly elaborate with the story and the context of this film, let me just go ahead and dive into the pros and cons of this film itself. One of the biggest praises I have regarding this film itself is the actual animation. Despite the fact that it is almost 10 years old, it still holds up relatively well. It's not trying to be realistic, it's not trying to emulate something like a real human would move or possibly talk. It's trying to take something that looks like it was originally drawn and then animated to a computer. The best way I could probably describe it is something similar to, say, maybe like a Brad Bird film like The Incredibles or Iron Giant. And while it not maybe in the same vein of those, it still takes a similar style where something looks like it was originally drawn as something like a cartoon or an anime, and then was originally 2D and then animated into 3D and make it CG. And the fact is, those styles and those animations, it still holds up relatively well. Another thing that regards in this film that's a positive is the action. There's a lot of action in this film, and it all is executed pretty well. Some of it, I will admit, looks like something that is straight out of Ghost in the Shell, which is also reference to Masamune. However, the action itself is actually really enthralling, and even though I saw this again for the third time, the fact that I could still be engaged by the action and still be entertained by it is something that is worth praising. And my final praise regarding the film itself is the fact that it does try to present an interesting theme of humanity's own self-destruction, our constant need to be violent, or constant need to be aggressive towards something that's different, and our own insecurity about our own place in the world, and trying to figure out a way to coexist with people that are entities that are different than us. The fact that it even tries to address that is something at least should be commendable. However, with those praises aside, there are two glaring problems that I couldn't help but realize when watching this film again, and that is the plot and the score. The plot itself is, while it is not terrible in terms of its execution, it's just insanely predictable. Now, I will admit the fact that I have seen this movie at least 3 times by now, I will admit that there's probably some residual memories from the past that I could remember bits and pieces of the plot itself and try to remember what exactly happened. However, there's a problem with that, is that you could sense the plot a mile away. I like to give you guys the benefit of the doubt and saying, like, if you watch this movie, I like to think that you could at least guess this plot coming from a mile away, and I can't exactly praise a story being predictable, and it's just something that is just like, There wasn't really much tension, there wasn't much surprise in it, there wasn't anything that stood out. It was all just, okay, we're going to go to this point, and then we're going to have this exposition, and then we're going to have this scene, and we're going to have this character moment, and then we're going to have this climax. It's just all something that just keeps going. You know where it's going to go, and there's really not much surprise when it comes to the conclusion. Another big problem, and probably not as much as the story, is the score. It's not that it's not bad either, it's just completely forgettable. I mean, again, I've seen this movie 3 times already. I still cannot remember a main theme to this movie, and I can't remember a particular musical cue that was something that was distinctly memorable. I mean, even though I literally just saw this movie right before recording this, I can't point out a single tune that stood out in my mind and something that was something like, if someone played a certain moment in the soundtrack, I would not be able to tell it was Appleseed. I really couldn't. My bottom line comes down to this. Action that does provide an interesting and well-done spectacle. Animation that still holds up relatively well despite the fact that it's almost a decade old. A theme that proved that at least tried to go a little extra mile and be more than a mindless action flick. However, with an extremely predictable plot and not much tension whatsoever, and the fact that the score is incredibly forgettable, I'm going to have to say that Appleseed is a fun but a flawed anime. So there you go, folks. That is my review of Appleseed. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, let me be clear in saying this. I wish I could enjoy this more than I actually did. I really want to love everything done by Masamune and just his work in general, because I love Ghost in the Shell so much. But I have to acknowledge that just because I like a certain creator's work, one particular work, I can't say that everything that he has done is a masterpiece, or everything that was done in terms of this film was better. I will admit, this is a reinterpretation and just judging on its face. So if you have read the original Appleseed manga, let me know what you think of it, and if you also recommend it, do you recommend me watching the sequel Ex Machina as well as reviewing Appleseed 13? Just comment below, tell me what you think, and until next time, I'm Perry the One-Armed Legend. You name it, I can play it.